Good evening. I am DC, and in this part of the country, I'm called DC rather. And on behalf of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, I want to welcome all our noble members, our partners, our sponsors, employees, and all listeners and viewers of this podcast. It's a part of a series that we've developed to talk to our communities, not just communities of color, but communities all over our country who are facing issues that will in some cases, will cause for you to have to involve law enforcement in your life. And that happens every day in our country, right? We are blessed to have some pretty good guests with us today. And I'm going to hold their names just for a second, but you'll catch on in just a minute. But let me give you a little bit of background on what Noble's idea is. The first podcast was we asked the director of Noble, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, Mr. Derek Crawford, to talk about his vision for what he'd like to see happen with Noble's outreach in terms of how do we talk to our communities of color, how do we talk to our young people, how do we make sure that what our law enforcement officers are facing every day and that are part of Noble and other organizations are actually getting through to people, right? And so how do we bring a community together, and how does Noble become a part of that conversation? And I think the law in your community is one of those projects that Mr. Crawford has helped spearhead with Noble. And let me tell you something. We're going to have two very, very well-represented law enforcement executives talk to us today about how do we get our communities to have an understanding of what law enforcement's role is, and then how do we get our community understand that there's a role that they play as well too, right? So before I get into a lot more banter, I want to make sure that we introduce our police chiefs today. We have two wonderful individuals who have been around law enforcement. I'm old, but let me tell you something. These guys are very young, but they've been around quite a bit. On this evening, we've got Colonel Von Bunn, who's the chief of police of the Newcastle County Police Department in Newcastle, Delaware, as well as Chief Jason Umberger, who's the chief of police of the Deland Police Department in Deland, Florida. And I want to make sure that when we talk about solutions and how do we talk about dealing with some of those issues that our law enforcement officers have to take home, that we talk to those leaders of these departments. And guess what? We got two of the best right here today, and we're going to talk to them right now. First, I want to bring on our very good friend, Colonel Von Bond Jr. out of Newcastle, Delaware. Man, what a place to be. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm good, Doc. I'm good. Come on, talk to us now. Lay it on the line for us. Lay it on the line for us. You've done a lot of writing, a lot of work, not only in Newcastle, but around the country and speaking and trying to talk to citizens about their role and their relationship with law enforcement. And on the converse, you've talked to your law enforcement officers about their role and responsibility with our citizens. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that the police cannot exist without the community, and the community cannot exist without the police. I think it's important that as law enforcement, that we are making every effort to engage in our communities, that we're going out, that we're working hand in hand with the communities, that we're communicating with them on a regular basis in order to do the things that need to be done to improve the quality of life for the individuals that reside within our communities. One of the things that we realize in Newcastle County Police Department is that we have to go beyond the thought process of traditional policing. I like to think of us as a very progressive police department, one that goes beyond just simply what I call cops and robbers. And when I initially joined the police department in 1991, after graduating from Delaware State College, now Delaware State University, when I came on, it was more about traditional policing. We were focused on judging our success based on what our stats told us. And over time, what we realized is that wasn't always a true measurement in terms of the success or how successful or you were in the communities. It came down really a lot to, as we got older, we realized that we had to involve the community, that we had to really embrace community policing. And I'm very fortunate that I follow in the path and the steps of former police chiefs who embraced this idea of community policing. And over the years, we have really ingrained it in the culture of our police department. And as it stands today, it's still a focal point It is something that we recognize. It's something that we know is a stronghold for us in terms of making those inroads into communities and having individuals that we can call upon when we have problems and being able to sit down with them. As I often say, the time to talk about issues and concerns is not during a crisis. The time that you want to discuss issues and concerns is when they aren't occurring. But you can forecast and you can look at issues that are taking place around this country, and you can say, okay, if that were to happen here, how will we handle it? And you get that input from the community leaders and community members that we provide police services for. It also involves us as a police department really making this a focal point for the men and women to wear the uniform. Just today in our roll calls, a few weeks ago or a few months ago, we held our public safety awards ceremony. And during that award ceremony, we recognized several officers for community outreach efforts that they did. And I noticed that when we were giving out the awards, it dawned on me after all these years of being there that we were simply giving them a letter, a nice letter, but we were giving them a letter. However, we were giving pins to officers that maybe did an investigation that led to several arrests, or we stopped a burglary trend, or they, had a gun arrest. We would give them a medal that they could place on their uniform, something that all officers are very proud of. And I went back to our professional development unit, and I told them that I wanted them to come up with a pin that we could give to officers for doing outstanding community service. And so those pins came in, and today, instead of simply placing them in a mailbox of the officer, when they had roll calls, I stopped in and we presented the pins to the officers that had earned those pins. And I think that it goes a long way, because what it does is it shows the officers that this is something that we value. This is something that we appreciate. And as I said to them, when you wear those pins, it often generates conversation. People ask you, well, what do those pins stand for? They see them on your chest. What does that mean? And so not only are we telling stories about, well, I made a car stop and I got 2 guns out of it and some drugs. Now we're telling the stories that Officer Dano from our police department today can tell, that he went to a house where a lady had lost her husband. And when he went back the following day, just to check up on her, to see how she was doing, he found out that she was having difficulty going up and down the steps because of her age. He then used the platform that we have available to us as law enforcement to reach out to a company that does the stair lifts. And when he told them what the situation was, they gladly partnered with us and went in and installed one of those stair lifts for her for free. She sent me an email, a letter, and she wanted to thank us for it. And so it's those kind of steps and those kind of actions that the officers take that really make the inroads into the communities. And I can talk about this past weekend, how we went into a neighborhood and we started with the a neighborhood cleanup, and then we brought different resource providers in, and we spent most of Saturday in this particular community. And again, it's something that you're making that inroads,
Sure.
You're keeping those relationships going, and it opens up a lot of communication. And at the end of the day, both the community it benefits from it, and certainly the police department.
Well, Chief Bond, I was just going to jump in there before we brought on Chief Umberger. I know you had recently written an article through the United States Department of Justice, the Dispatch magazine, regarding how the law in your community can help change my community. But I think I don't need to ask the question, because what you just said was even officers, giving officers one up, giving them a thumbs up for when they do something outside of just basic law enforcement. You're talking about visiting an older lady who just lost her, or a widow who just lost her husband, just checking them. She's having difficulty. That's, to me, what law in your community is. Not just, I'm going to show up for an arrest. I mean, if I'm called, there's certainly something that you call me. You didn't call me because there's a cat in my basement, so to speak. Well, you may have some of those calls, but we hope not. But I think you just answered the question I was going to pose to you before I brought on Chief Umberger, is, out of what you wrote, how does that apply in the strategies that you're using there in Newcastle? But unless maybe there's another strategy that you're using also, but real community police, what they call cops way back in the day, seems like it's working.
It does. It's not an overnight success.
Sure.
And as I talk to the officers, and we have an authorized strength of 415 officers on our police department, and I just finished today was my last roll call tours so that I can address everyone on the department. And the message is we are in a very trying time in law enforcement.
Sure.
The last 16 months or so have been a very challenging time for us, dealing with COVID up through the events involving Mr. George Floyd, the subsequent protests, the calls for defunding police, getting rid of the police, and how police were viewed overall by the communities. And the sad part about all of that is that there are thousands of great police officers who go out every day and they lay it all on the line to make a difference. And they were caught up in this whirlwind. And I watched as the spirits of a lot of our officers were broken during this time period. And I saw where a lot of our supporters were now turning their backs on law enforcement.
Oh, wow.
And so as I say to our officers, I wish there was one program that we could come up with, just one program that we can come up with that would change the mindset and get people back where they were supporting law enforcement and working with us. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. What does exist is the opportunity to make and change the mindset of individuals one interaction at a time.
Wow.
One interaction at a time. When you go there and you provide a level of police service that exceeds the expectations, when you go to a call for service and you show empathy to those people and you treat them as if they were your own family, that's when you start to make the change. And it's a slow change.
Yeah.
And I have another example where just the other day, a lady contacted me about one of our officers who did just that. She said that she wasn't a supporter of law enforcement. She was dealing with a domestic case, a domestic violence issue. And one of our officers, Officer Sweeney Jones, and I like to give their names because
Sure.
it really means something.
Shout them out.
Yeah, Officer Sweeney Jones with us went out to a domestic related call. And the lady said that she never really cared for law enforcement, but was after that interaction and the things that he did with her to make her understand that he cared about her situation. He was concerned about her and her well-being. When he left from handling that call for service, she said she felt obligated to reach out to me through an email and let me know that that officer changed her opinion about law enforcement. And so today when I spoke about that in our roll calls because it's important. Again, take advantage of the opportunities. Not every situation, not every interaction will we have where it's going to end up with everybody happy at the end. There's sometimes when police come in and we have to make a decision and everyone doesn't agree on it, but the officer has to do that. And you're not going to make everyone happy. But the vast majority of the calls for service we go to, you can take that one interaction and you can change the mindset of people to get them to see that, you know what, we are not the Derek Chauvins and some of these other officers who have done some egregious acts across this country that has created a lot of embarrassment and shame on the good officers who are going out there every day to provide service and to protect others.
Well, I tell you, I want to stop you right there, Chief Bond, because I want to bring on Chief Jason Umberger. Chief Jason Umberger is not new to this thing either as well. And as a matter of fact, I thought the distinction was rather great because number one, Chief Bond, you're in the Northeast. If I'm looking directly, I think you're close up there Northeast. And of course, Chief Umberger, now you're down in Florida, but you've served in the Northeast as well in Pennsylvania. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your relationship with the law in your community because you were using this program pretty much when it started back in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Can you talk a little bit about how that usage then and how you're using it now with the Dealing Police Department? How is that working out for your men and for the community, for your men and women in the community?
Absolutely. That's correct. I spent 24 years of my career in central Pennsylvania, right outside Harrisburg, which is the state capital of Pennsylvania. And there I was very fortunate that I got to meet former Noble member, Grayling Williams, who just recently passed away. But I met Grayling, and he introduced me to Noble, introduced me to the law in your community and the great programs that Noble provides. And that really fit into my philosophy of community policing. I believe that community policing is for everybody in the police department. Each person has their own sphere of influence, and we stress relationship building, getting to know the people in our community on a first name basis, and them getting to know us. Because I've found over the years that as you develop relationships with people in the community and allow them to see you as a human being, and we see them as human beings, that the trust and transparency goes up. Obviously, we're being more transparent, and then trust follows. And it's vital that we have the trust and gain the trust of the community. As we've seen lots of negative instances where that trust gets torn down because of the actions of several, few officers across the country. And it's like Colonel Bond was saying, that impacts the morale of all the officers that are out there trying to do the right thing every day and build good, strong community relations. We have different initiatives that we do, and I borrowed some of these. We have Operation Honorable Endeavor, which I borrowed from Chief Robert Martin of Susquehanna Township Police Department outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Honorable Endeavor is simply that we recognize that working to build relationships in the community is vital. And so when our officers are on patrol, they're looking to do honorable endeavors. And what an honorable endeavor is very simple. You see a youth or a community member, out in their yard, at a basketball court or whatnot, wherever they are, we stop, we get out of our car, we go introduce ourselves, and we try to learn something about that person, and we try to tell them something about ourselves. And as we do that, as each officer does that several times a day, that has a multiplying effect in a community. And so that we are starting to get to know the people that live in our community, the people that we police, and they are getting to know us. And I just think that that's one of the most important things we can do as law enforcement. And on top of that, we have lots of other initiatives that we've used that were very successful in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that have proven very successful in DeLand as well.
To me, because I use the term dealing, and of course it's DeLand, Florida. Right now, what we want to do with this program is we want to bring both of you guys on. I think right now is a great opportunity to talk about some of those initiatives. But I want to pep you with a couple of questions. And I have not sent these questions to these folks, but I'm not going to play softball. But we're not going to do gotcha either on this program. But Chief Bond, unless some folks have been living on a rock, and hopefully nobody's living on a rock these days. I know it's tough out there on a lot of our citizens, but the numbers in our country when it comes to juvenile crime, and I don't think that anybody can sit here now and say that we've solved that issue. But the numbers in terms of juvenile crime, I mean, they've shot up so tough in my area, in the South down here. It's really bad. Is this something that you all as law enforcement professionals, and I'm going to give each one of you a shot at this question. Do you see this as cyclical, or is this something that we're probably in for a long journey in terms of addressing the violent juvenile crime that's happening in our communities all around the country? Chief Bond?
Yeah, well, you're correct. We're seeing it. We are seeing more juveniles that are engaging in the more violent crimes. Like I said, I've been on since 1991, and I can tell you that it seems that it has become worse. We are constantly thinking about how we can address these issues and what we can do, and we have a few different programs. But I think at the end of the day, this issue that we're dealing with right now is so much larger than just the police department.
Sure.
And we are talking, I look at it and I think about this quite a bit. We have now, we have a group of young men and increasingly young females who are at a point where they no longer have hope or the belief that they're going to live past the age of 19 or 21 years old. And when these young people have that type of mindset, because they are surrounded by the violence on such a regular basis, that they go to funerals like we used to go to house parties. Every weekend, there's a different funeral for someone that they know. They begin to lose hope about the future. And when you lose hope and you don't believe that there's a future, you live every day as if it's your last. You don't plan for the future because you can't see it. And this is a deep-rooted issue that has been plaguing our communities for a number of years. And I think, sadly, it's reached a point now with the proliferation of weapons, the easy access to weapons on the street, the music that a lot of these young people are listening to, where it does nothing but glorify murder, violence, drug dealing. When you talk about the culture of the no snitching culture that has permeated the communities now for many years, but it seems as if now over the last few years, it's gotten to the point now where you have victims of shootings who don't want to cooperate and tell you what happened. We look at the trauma that a lot of our youth are exposed to. You know, we have youth that are seeing people shot and killed in front of them. They are hearing gunshots and running for cover as if they're in a war themselves. And oftentimes, what we're finding is that a lot of these youth that are subjected to that, who are witness these kind of events, they're not getting the necessary mental health care that they need. No one is dealing with that trauma. And as the saying goes, hurt people hurt people.
Wow, I use it all the time.
I think that that's what we're seeing now. I think that we're at a point, you look at the family structure now. We have a lot of fathers that aren't involved in their children's lives, especially young men. They're not involved in their lives. In my time as a detective, I did homicide years ago. A good friend of mine who just recently retired, we would talk about it all the time, said, how many times have we ever had a suspect back here for a serious crime, and that suspect came from either the two-parent household or they had both parents? If the parents weren't together, they had both parents who were involved in that child's life. Very, very few times have we seen that being the case. And so there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of dynamics that play a role in where we are right now. And our position in law enforcement is, I don't want to play like I'm Superman and I have a cape and we can solve all the problems. This is going to take a unified approach. If we're serious about this is going to take a unified approach from the schools, from the community leaders, from the families, from the teachers, everyone. We all have to get on the same page, and we have to be sincere about our efforts. And as I talked about with the children, we created the first behavioral health unit in law enforcement in the state of Delaware, where we have mental health professionals that ride with our officers. We also have what we call the Hero Help Program, which is a substance abuse disorder program. And so initially we had the Hero Help Program, and because my degree is in psychology, I never went back for advanced degree. I barely got out of where I was, so I didn't want to
stop.
I didn't want.
You're talking about graduating, oh Lordy, not cum Lordy.
So but I've always had an interest in that, and so we married our behavioral health unit, the mental health component, with our substance abuse, because we found that they often are coexisting issues. And so part of that, we were able to get a large grant, and we have brought on another victims advocate who is dealing specifically with young people. And so when we have situations we're able to reach out to that person who has a ton of resources and making sure that we're at least getting them on the road to dealing with the trauma and some of the things that they're seeing on a regular basis.
I want to stop you right there, Chief, but because I want to pass that same baton to Chief Umberger, and the question I posed to you in terms of the juvenile crime and the serious uptick in violence that we're seeing around the country. Other than waving a magic wand, which I don't think anybody's found that thing yet, wherever it's the Holy Grail, I don't know where it is, but what are you seeing in Delon and Florida? And you hear from other executives on the team who are really trying to seriously address this issue of violent juvenile crime in our country?
We're seeing exactly the same thing that Colonel Bond's talking about. An uptick in juveniles carrying guns, using those guns. We just recently had a very sad incident late in April where a 62-year-old grandmother was driving into a neighborhood to go home, and her car was opened fire on by over 30 rounds of an AK-47. They are youth that are in our community. They didn't realize they were shooting at that car because they believed her grandson was in that car.
Wow.
And that poor lady, it's a miracle that she survived. But, it's like Colonel Bond talked about, nobody wants to talk about it. The community is outraged about this lady, a church-going member that got shot, but they are reluctant to and we believe we have some eyewitnesses and we know who did this, but we can't get people to come forward.
Sure.
And that is very disheartening. And what that's done has really kind of brought a grassroots movement together. The concerned clergy of West Volusia has met with me, and I've been meeting with them since I became police chief. As Colonel Bond said, the time to talk isn't when you have a crisis, it's before. So I had already fortunately established those relationships. I had formed a police community advisory council in the first several months of my tenure there, because I did the same thing in Pennsylvania. And I brought together a diverse group of people from all across our city to talk about problems that are in the community and then pick utilize their experience to come up with solutions, joint solutions. Because as Colonel Bond said, it's not only law enforcement doesn't have all the answers.
Sure.
And so I believe we're stronger when we work together, and our community members have great ideas. And so what we have done is we created a public safety improvement plan. One of my great captains that I brought on from the state of Georgia, Captain Pruance Dice, who's also a member of Noble, he said, "Chief, I know exactly what to do here. Let me draw up a public safety improvement plan, which involves all facets of the community and gets everybody involved: law enforcement, code enforcement, the health department, our homeless shelters, everybody, and our clergy. Everybody comes on board to help solve this problem and have buy-in for a solution." And so we have formed a community policing engagement team. I found one of my great lieutenants who has an outstanding reputation in the community, and I told him, "You go hand pick your officers to get out in the community beyond our regular patrols, and we're going to work hard in neighborhoods where people are telling us they want us to be, they want to know us better." And so we have begun that process, and we are seeing the fruits of it already. Other things that Colonel Bond talked about, the violence that we're seeing with young people. One of the things that I believe deeply in that is escalating the violence with our young people is violent video games and violent movies and television shows. I believe our youth are being inoculated and being desensitized to violence because they are immersing themselves in violent video games, violent television programs, and violent movies. And I believe in an old adage that says, what we look at lovingly and longingly, we eventually become. And these kids are being left to their own devices in many cases, sitting hours on end, playing games, watching movies that glorify violence, and they are becoming desensitized to it. And I think we just really need to take a hard look at that. There's been some studies done on the brain what it actually does to the brain when young people are saturating their minds with violent images, and how that affects their thinking. And so I would commend to all of you a great book called "Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill." Dave Grossman co-authored that with an educator, and it's got some very good science in there, and some schools in Michigan worked with the community and the police department to basically, and the parents, to say, let's turn off the television at night. Let's turn off these violent video games. And you know what they saw? They saw violence go down in the schools, bullying went down, violence in the schools went down, and academic performance went up. And so I just think that's a piece that we're missing here in our society. And I also believe that we as a police department can provide, when Colonel Bond talked about people that have lost hope, he's right about that. If you look at communities that don't have any hope, you're going to see lots of these types of deviant behavior, because hopeless people are desperate people.
Sure.
And I believe police officers can bring hope to a community. And I was just talking with our new recruits about that today, about bringing hope to communities by being in that community and being a beacon of hope, by the example that they set, by interacting. We have an officer, a young officer that I just learned. He took that Operation Honorable Endeavor to another level on his own. He's a 24-year-old officer. He has been buying footballs and basketballs and baseballs out of his own pocket, driving around our city and finding kids that are outside, getting out of the car, playing catch with them, and then giving them the ball and leaving.
Wow.
I mean, you want to talk about a powerful testimony. We've also improved. We hired a director of our Police Athletic League, revitalized that. We're providing activities beyond traditional sports in our Police Athletic League. I told our director, I said, Willie, I want you to think outside the box. And man, we have cooking classes. We have fishing. We're taking kids fishing. We have photography classes. I have my crime scene technicians teaching kids how to take, pictures. Sure. We do an on-track program where we have bicycles donated to us. We bring the kids from the Spring Hill Boys and Girls Club into our police department. We partnered with those folks, and we bring them in, and the officers and the kids work together on fixing the bikes. They get educated on bike safety. They get a helmet. We have several outings with them while we ride bike with them. And at the end of the program, they get to take the bike home as a gift. And so these are just different things that we're doing here in DeLand to try to connect with our kids and give them alternatives to run in the streets unsupervised, to be with we have officers that are volunteering their time with a weightlifting program, with wrestling. We got a wrestling program going. Like I said, cooking, fishing, all different types of activities that we can be in these kids' lives in a positive manner. And I think that's the only way that we're going to make any headway. But I still believe it's incumbent upon kids and their parents or their guardians, whoever they're living with, to keep them away from just saturating themselves with violence and this love of violence. It's a pandemic.
Literally. Chief Umberger, I'm going to tee the next question up, and you really just introduced it right there. And my question was going to be, aren't the parents, and I want to do a two-parter on this, aren't the parents the first line of defense? And same thing with you, Chief Bond. The parents are first line of defense when it comes to ensuring that our children are citizens, good citizens, and that they have role models, and that we talk about these alliances with girls and boys clubs. We talk about fishing rodeos. We talk about all that stuff. But the parents, and I think that's what a lot of us here, especially Noble, I think is trying to push out there with this law in your community piece and getting our officers out there. We want to talk to the citizens, but we also want to talk to parents as well, because you control that narrative, right? And that's the first thing I want to talk about. Aren't the parents the first line of defense for you all, number one? And then number two, are we asking our officers to do way, way, way too much? I mean, I asked this question of Chief Rollins, who just retired here at Memphis Police Department, the chief of police down here. And he gave an interesting answer, and I want to hear from you all too as well. The second part of that question: the parents being the first line of defense, and also, aren't we asking our officers to be a lot more than kind of what they signed up for? Chief Umberg, I want to start with you, and then hit Chief on.
Yeah, our parents are our first line of defense, and that's been a frustration for another great thing that we're doing. I was fortunate enough to meet a lady in our community by the name of Miss Kathleen Cormack, who has the same passion I do in to interact and educate and get police and kids together to talk. And we've started a program called Conversations with Police, CWP, and we've been out at DeLand High School, DeLand Middle School, DeLand Boys and Girls Club. We've been really all over Volusia County. The Volusia Flagler police chiefs have endorsed her. And so we're everywhere trying to engage kids and getting kids and officers together to talk about, law enforcement, how to interact with law enforcement. Kids are able to ask questions. We answer them. And we just, we usually have a meal with them. We do sports trivia. We do history trivia to break the ice and just get to know kids, right? Well, one of the frustrations that Kathleen and I have is getting parents to bring their kids to us. We have that barrier sometimes, and I understand that barrier. In some of minority communities, that there's distrust of the police. There's historic things here in Florida and really everywhere that cause that. But yeah, we need adults to help buy into what we're trying to do. And to answer your question, are we asking our police to do too much? I would say probably some of my officers would say, yeah, Chief Umberger's asking us to do way too much. And there is a breaking point, right? There's a limit and a level to what we can really do. But I just believe that in order for us to be good enforcers of integrity, we've got to spend that time building relationships with people in our community so that they trust us enough to tell us what we need to know to help extricate those people inside a community that are terrorizing them, that are perpetrating violence around them. But right now, in some communities, they are so terrified of the violence in their community that they don't even want to talk to the police about helping us extricate them from their community and keep them safe. I've talked to a mother that I know very well, and I know her child very well, and they witnessed a crime. Her son wanted to come forward and tell us what he saw, and she forbid him to do that. And so that's a tough thing, and those are two people that I have very strong relationships with.
Sure.
So that's what we're facing, as law enforcement. And it's going to take a lot of effort and work on our part to build that trust back up to the point where, we can get people to open up to us and help us keep them safe.
Gotcha. Chief Bond.
Well, yeah, I agree with what the chief just said. I will say this, that when you say the parents, the first line of defense, I kind of look at it from the standpoint of, I think that parents are the first line of responsibility.
Okay.
And when I say that, I mean that you have, as a parent, you have a responsibility to take rearing a child seriously. As a parent, you have the responsibility of setting the boundaries, discussing what accountability is, disciplining your child. And, I often think about, and I share this when I talk to young people, that when I was growing up, I love my mother and father, but they were tough on me. And my dad didn't become, a friend of mine till I got on my own. And now we're the best of friends. But when I was growing up, he set boundaries.
Yeah.
And he told me, no, you're not going to that party, or if you're going to be home at this time, and that's it. Other people could stay out as long as they wanted. I realize it now that what he was doing was he was teaching me about responsibility. He was teaching me about respecting authority and understanding that there's a process to this thing we call life. And so I think that, it really starts with them, with the parents. And I, having two children myself, I try to do the same thing along with my wife. We try to instill the same thing so that our children will know and understand what it takes to be, make it in this world, in this life, and to be successful. In terms of asking about the police and if we're doing too much, with policing is ever changing. We have to change with society, and as those issues come up, the social, the societal ill issues come up. As a police department, we are the only entity that is 24/7, 365 days a year. And so we have to evolve. We have to do more. When I came on, we didn't deal with many of the issues that we're dealing with now. But you know what? We have to now. We're dealing with, dementia and so forth was around back then, but not to the level that it is right now. So as a police department, we're consistently going out and we're dealing with issues with of community members that are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. And you know what? That's a problem. So we have to get better at how we address those concerns and what can we do better. And we came up with a program a while ago called Project LifeSafe, where if families are interested, they have a family member who is suffering from one of these two illnesses, they can sign their family member up and they get a band, they get a bracelet. And when their family member, if they happen to walk away from the house, well, now they call us and we're able to track them and get them back home safely. That was something that we weren't doing when I came on the police department. But because you have a consistent evolution in society with things that are changing and us being on the front lines, we have to do more. We call ourselves professional. We want to pay as professional. A lot of us have gone to school. So that means that you can't stay stuck in doing policing the way that you used to do policing back in the 70s, in the 80s, and even the 90s. We have to evolve with that. So yes, we do more. We do more. There's no question about it. And I don't know what the answer is to that. We hope that other, outside resources and programs and so forth will come on board and really jump in and help. But what we find with that is many times you have programs that are grant funded. They're there for a short period of time. Their grant runs out and then they're nowhere to be found.
That's right.
The police department, we're here. And so, yes, we do more. We have to do more. And unless somebody can tell me another way, we're going to continue to do it.
You'll keep doing it, right? Well, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I got to get two more subjects in before we get out of here and let our executive director, Dwayne Crawford, come on. But I want to make sure that we touch on this thing that is prevalent as violent juvenile crime in our country, because this tends to lead to that. And that's the prevalence of guns on our streets across America. I don't think there's any community that has not been touched by guns stolen out of cars or this, but it seemingly looks like that legislators around the country, whether you're a red state, blue state, purple state, or green state, are loosening restrictions in terms of citizens' rights to carry either a concealed weapon or carry weapons permitless or what have you. Where do we go? How do you all as law enforcement executives through Noble and some of these other organizations talk to these governors and talk to these state legislators and say, look, that's not helpful to me in my community right now. In Dillon and as well as in Newcastle and cities like Memphis, Dallas, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., these types of things just can't be helpful. How do you have those conversations? I want to give you each about a minute on that, and then we're gonna shift to another piece, and then we're gonna bring in Director Crawford.
Would you like me to start?
Yeah, you go ahead. I'm sorry, Chief Weinberger, please.
Well, I see a little bit of a contrast, a difference between Pennsylvania and Florida with kind of I would call Florida a much more gun culture, importance of carrying guns and citizens owning guns and having guns. There seems to be a stronger culture of that than in Pennsylvania that I've observed. I believe that people need to be responsible if they own a gun. And what I see far too frequently here in DeLand, to some extent I saw it in Pennsylvania, but it seems in Florida, I really see it. Individuals that they'll have a concealed carry permit, they'll have a legal carry permit. So they've obtained that gun legally. They don't have any issues with it as far as a criminal record or anything like that. But they're very sloppy with caring for it and keeping track of it. I can't tell you how many cars we have. And when I say broken into and guns stolen,
sure, not
broken into, car doors unlocked with firearms left in cars overnight. And we have, a criminal element that is out there looking for that. And we are making it entirely too easy for these guns to end up in the hands of the wrong people. And, I just think it comes down to, I don't understand why people even leave a gun in a car. At the end, that gun should be brought into the home, locked in a locker, secured in a house, not left in a vehicle. And certainly if it's going to be left in a vehicle, it's got to be locked in a trunk or locked in a safe, that can't be easily accessed.
Not in your glove compartment or your armrest, right?
Yes. And then, it's not that hard. People that are looking for those opportunities are trying open car doors. They're open and unlocked. And of course, these people, they carry NRA stickers. They put them on their cars. Well, that's a car that you're going to want to try the door on, isn't it? And maybe I'll get lucky and there'll be a gun unsecured in there. And we see that over and over again. And then we see those guns used in crimes. And, those guns are ended up in the hands of wrong people, of a criminal element. I believe that, there needs to be responsible gun ownership. I believe there needs to be, a system that not, anybody can't just go buy a gun. There's got to be some control of that. Sure. But what's the answer to all this?
Simple checks and balances, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, and those people that have a right to own a gun, that do own a gun, please, we've got to be more responsible with our ownership.
Gotcha. Chief Bond.
Well, I agree 100%. And I think in terms of dealing with the legislators, the politicians, and we have to, as law enforcement, we have to continue to show them the type of incidents that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We have to show them how destructive these weapons are and what they are doing to the communities, especially when they end up in the hands of those that have a criminal mindset. Sure. The chief is correct. It is extremely frustrating. It sounds, he and I could be the chief of the same police department in the same jurisdiction, because what he talked about, the irresponsible gun ownership, is at an all-time high. You look at last year, the ATF reported that there were record gun sales in this country. Millions and millions of weapons were legally sold. And we don't know how many were illegally sold, but we know legally sold. And a lot of these were first-time gun owners, and they were buying these weapons because everybody wants to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, in my nearly 30 years of police service here in Newcastle County, I've maybe seen 2 incidences where a homeowner has protected themselves from some intruder coming into the house. The vast majority of those weapons, a lot of those weapons, I'm not going to say the majority, but a lot of those weapons that people buy for the home protection end up being used in domestic violence arguments. Somebody has been drinking, they get upset. Now you have a gun in the house, they go get the gun, they shoot and they kill their spouse or significant other. Sadly, we just had a case not too long ago. 12-year-old girl upset over school, committed suicide in a house. These are the tragedies that are happening, as well as the violence that's taking place on the street. And so I think that, I heard today on the news where there was just an arrest made up in Philadelphia, which is about 40 minutes north of us. And they had 3 individuals that they were arresting. One individual he was arrested for making straw purchases. He purchased 37 firearms. 37 firearms he purchased. There's something wrong with that. There should be a flag that goes up. You know, who goes out and they purchase 37 firearms? And a lot of these firearms will end up sold and they're on the streets, throughout Pennsylvania, probably some in Delaware and beyond. And so we really have to look at, what the rules are, what the laws are. And I think for those individuals that we find illegally possessing guns, I think that there needs to be a stringent sentence that follows that.
Sure. Now, before I bring on Director Crawford, I want to pitch this thing here because Noble's role in all of this is to bring together collaboratively executives, Black law enforcement executives, FO, fraternity or police, everybody to the table to figure out how do we address a lot of these issues in our communities. Law in your community, the program itself, it's just a program, it's a project. But if we don't have buy-in from officers and we don't have buy-in from citizens, then it's just another thing we can hang our hat on, right? It's almost like just a hat hanger, so to speak. What would you all like to see, and how can we do this? How can we expand the program? Or what would you like to see added to the program where it will help us to build a better system or promote trust within our own overall communities, not only with officers, but also with citizens, getting citizens to actually do that buy-in, to make that call. Chief Umberger, the young lady you talked about who didn't want her son to actually make the call. How do you get this program, Law in Your Community, so entrenched in our law enforcement and our officers, but also inside the citizens' heads to say, this works, y'all. If we work together, this works. How do we do? And I'm gonna give you a few seconds on each one of those guys. Chief Bond, if you would, sir.
Well, for us, the law in your community, and I want to be clear that right now the officers that we have that are actually going out putting on the program are the members of Noble. And so it's not every officer on the department, but what I think is great about the law in your community is the opportunity for us. A lot of times we're going into schools. Prior to COVID, we were going into schools, so we had the opportunity to really reach out and engage youth that did not live in Newcastle County Police jurisdiction. They lived in other jurisdictions, and so we had them there where we could actually talk with them, answer questions, things of that nature. And so that was always a positive for us. Moving forward, the goal is that we continue to push this out. We have a few officers that are part of Noble, our Delaware chapter Noble, that are heavily involved with this. Captain Treadwell has been a leader in this program. And so we have been slowly bringing it in where more officers are educated about this. And a lot of this because of Captain Treadwell being one of the lead instructors in our vehicle stops, where he's actually talking to and teaching the recruits about this. We're able to integrate a lot of what we talk about and what we put in this program into the actual course of instruction. So it's very beneficial for us. The goal, like I said, is to continue to push it out and continue to use it, because we do see, and I wish I could tell you that I had a stat and tell you how well it's working, but I can tell you from the times when I have been there and when I have participated in the training, anytime you can have a group of young people where they're raising their hands and they're asking questions and you're able to get them involved in the program, where, we do the role playing where we go from us as the police officers to now we're the ones being stopped and they're the police officers. So they get an opportunity to see what it's like, for the not only for them as a person being stopped, but as a police officer making that stop, and why certain things are asked of people when we stop them doing vehicle stops. So very, very beneficial.
Thank you, Chief Umberger.
Yeah, I think the key to keep law in your community out there and keep it relevant is utilizing the relationships that Colonel Bond talked about and the ones that I talked about in our community, and asking them to be our emissaries. In other words, asking them, to the people that are in their sphere of influence, hey, you really need to come out and get engaged with this law in your community program. It's excellent. It's excellent for our young people and parents alike. And the other thing I think is critical, and where we've had some success, is that we've got to take it into the communities to make it easy for people to get there. So often we want to choose, a venue that's in the center of a city, for instance. And, that might be difficult. There might be some barriers for some folks to get there. Whereas if we move the program around strategically to different areas of our city, we're going to get maybe people can walk there, ride a bicycle, whatever. And I think that's a critical piece too. Take the program to the people rather than asking them to come to us, make it a little easier. The other thing that we did the first couple times is incorporated we had our officers come out and shoot some baskets with the kids after the program, and then we provided some donuts and coffee and, some food brings some people in sometimes. However we can get people.
Food gets me. It just gets me.
However you can get people, in seats and engaging is critical.
Let me say this, guys. I have enjoyed, and we've got to bring Director Crawford on, but I've enjoyed you all in the way you present it, because you made it so clear that law in your community helps, but it can't do all, and your officers can't do all without the buy-in from the community at large, whether it's clergy, whether it's girls and boys clubs, whether it's local elected officials. But it's one of those things, I believe, that you need all hands on deck, so to speak. I think you guys will agree with that, or it doesn't work, right? But the key to that is you got a law enforcement officer and you got a citizen. How do we marry those two together? And I think what you all have laid out for us is an excellent foundation to not only right now for me to get out of here, and thank you too for being a part of this wonderful conversation about Noble, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, but also to talk about how do we take this program, the law in your community, and make it something that's standard across our country. And guys, thank you so much for what you do. Stay safe, and we'll see you again here on this program again, hopefully very, very soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Right now, guys, I want to bring on the one and only Dwayne Crawford, the executive director. He's a good alpha man. That's all I'll say about him. But
don't start, Colonel.
I know. We gotta. We're not gonna start that right up in here. We got the whole MPAC, but
Omega.
We already know. We know where you come from. Director Crawford, thank you, sir, for joining in with us. And I'm gonna get out of the way. This is your program to close out, sir. Thank you so much for having me here as somewhat of a moderator for you. Okay.
And thank you, everyone. And just greetings from the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, Noble. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I want to thank our great moderator, Daryl Catron, for all you've done. Also want to thank our Noble chief executives here. Definitely Colonel Bond and Chief Umberger. I thank you two for all you do for your communities, for our profession, but also for our nation, and providing the leadership that you do. And let me just say this to our listening audience here. These two men, who you heard a lot about them already, have been consistent leaders in our profession. And to me, they represent the best of our leadership. And as I said to you, all of us earlier, that when you look at what occurred with the murder of George Floyd and the social protests and COVID and everything, I want to just applaud them and our agencies. And they mentioned it earlier, thousands and thousands and thousands of men and women that serve our law enforcement community do an amazing job. We also have to own, unfortunately, when things aren't done professionally, not done the right way. But I want to thank those two gentlemen also. I thought I would do is start off by just giving a kind of synopsis of what I've heard. And the common thread between Colonel Bond and Chief Umberger were the following. They both talked about what? Relationship building, the importance of relationship building. They also discussed the issue of humanity, respecting and learning about each other, and taking the time to understand that we're all human beings. We all want to have success in life. We all want to feel safe, of course. And I think the importance of our law enforcement community and our communities in general, understanding we need each other. There is no way as a nation and as a community, we're going to address, in some cases, the increases in crime, but also dealing with what? The issues of trust, legitimacy. It's going to take all of us doing our part. Other part I want to talk about real quickly is you also heard about consistency. You can't wait till there's a crisis to try to engage your community. It takes consistent engagement by all parties, both law enforcement and our community. And lastly, I want to talk about the issue of hope. There was also an emphasis on both of our executive leaders here, that too many of our communities do not have hope. And they feel that, unfortunately, today is their existence and maybe not their future. I want to just shift for a second and just also emphasize what was mentioned earlier. Yes, the issue of juvenile crime. I'm actually tomorrow, the National Organization of Law Enforcement Executives, our National President, Linda Williams, and greetings to Ms. Williams, she'll be actually having a private meeting with some congressional leaders about the issue of crime. So I do want to make you aware that we are very much aware of the increase of our juvenile violent crime. We think the law in your community, though, can help. I said earlier, it is not perfect. It's not a panacea. It can't solve everything, but it can, we think, engage our young people in a very positive way. And I also want to just highlight also gun violence. We know the issues of juvenile crime, and unfortunately, the increases of gun violence are a bad combination. Now, the Law in Your Community program, it is not perfect. We do think, though, it can be a piece of an engagement program by our law enforcement communities, approximately 18,000 agencies, in how we can effectively do what? Engage our communities. Now, the program is customizable. It does not have one way of how we deliver it. So we can customize that program to the needs of your community. And I mean the needs of your community, literally. We can take it from the beginning to end. It can be done multiple times, multiple places. But the biggest thing is this. We customize both for the community and our law enforcement agencies and our leaders, such as Chief Umberger and Colonel Bond. How can we do what? Listen to our community, build those relationships, give them a chance to meet their law enforcement leadership as well as their officers in that community, and have the officers do what? Have a chance to engage those citizens. But again, it is not a perfect program. But I'll say this. The program now has multiple delivery methods. It can be done in person. It can be done virtually. We also do what? Have programs for middle school, high school adults. And last thing I'll say is this. The program's job is to serve, and to serve. And those are all communities, all children's, all parents, and also all of our law enforcement communities. But again, I want to thank, again, our moderator, our two panelists for all they do, and also to say to the entire viewing audience is that we and Noble are here to serve, period. And we look forward to reaching out to any of you all. Feel free to call us at any time. But yes, and by the way, the program is entirely free. There is no cost to the community to be engaged. But I want to thank everyone for this evening, and also thank again our great moderator and our two panelists.